It's after midnight, September 26, 1983. Deep inside a secret Soviet military bunker, dim red lights bathe the room in an ominous glow. The air is heavy with cigarette smoke. Rows of officers sit at consoles, their eyes locked on the glowing green screens in front of them. The silence is broken only by the low hum of the machines, until a shrill alarm shatters the calm. A voice over the intercom confirms what everyone sees on their monitors: an American nuclear missile has been launched. The warning system shows it's heading straight toward the Soviet Union. The men in the room freeze, eyes wide. But before anyone can speak, the system updates again. 2 missiles. Then 3. 4. 5. The blinking icons on the screen mark them, streaking across the virtual map like phantom daggers. Every man in that room knows what those blips mean. If they're real, they have minutes to decide the fate of the world. At the center of it all sits Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov. His face is calm, but inside, his mind is a storm. He's been trained for this. He knows the protocol. Report the launches immediately, the Kremlin will order a counterstrike, and Soviet missiles will be on their way toward the United States. It would be the beginning of World War III. But something doesn't add up. Welcome to Lore of the Multiverse, where the most incredible, hidden, and almost unbelievable true stories come to life. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stick with us, because tonight, you're going to hear how one man, in the face of unimaginable pressure, may have single-handedly saved the world from nuclear annihilation. To understand why this moment was so dangerous, you need to know the world in 1983. The Cold War had been a silent, simmering conflict for decades, an arms race, a battle of ideologies, a constant shadow over every government decision. But that year, it wasn't just cold, it was on the brink of boiling over. Just weeks before, a tragedy had deepened the hostility between the US and the Soviet Union. Korean Airlines Flight 007, a civilian passenger jet, had strayed into Soviet airspace and was shot down by a Soviet fighter jet. All 269 people aboard were killed, including a sitting US congressman. The world's outrage was immediate, and the rhetoric between Washington and Moscow became harsher than ever. US President Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire. The Kremlin denounced the West's aggression. On both sides, military forces were on high alert. And hanging over it all was the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. If one side launched, the other would launch back, no matter what. Stanislav Petrov wasn't a politician or a high-profile general. He was a career officer in the Soviet Air Defense Forces, assigned to Serpukhov 15, a top-secret facility outside Moscow. It was here that the Soviets monitored their OKO satellite early warning system, watching for any sign of US missile launches. The system had one job: detect a threat in time for the Soviet leadership to order a retaliatory strike. If an American missile was launched, Soviet missiles needed to be in the air before the first one landed. That meant Petrov, sitting at his post that night, had mere minutes to decide. At 12:15 a.m., the system blared its first alert. One intercontinental ballistic missile had been launched from the United States. Petrov's heart thumped harder, but his mind was trained to move methodically. One missile could be a test, an accident, or a feint, but before he could finish that thought, the system showed 2 missiles. Then 3. Then 4. Then 5. 5 missiles wasn't enough to wipe out the Soviet Union entirely, but it was enough to cripple it. In military strategy, this was the nightmare scenario: a first strike to destroy command and control, leaving the victim too paralyzed to launch back. His subordinates looked to him for the call. They were trained to trust the system, and the system was telling them America had just started a nuclear war. Petrov's mind raced. He thought about the system itself. OKO was new, and he knew it wasn't perfect. He also thought about the logic of nuclear war. If the Americans were truly attacking, why would they send only 5 missiles? A real first strike would be massive, overwhelming, meant to erase the Soviets in minutes. 5 seemed illogical. But here's the thing: logic doesn't stop a missile in the air. If Petrov was wrong, every second he hesitated was a second closer to Soviet cities turning to firestorms. His training screamed, "Report it." His gut whispered, "Don't." This is the moment history pivoted. With alarms blaring, officers staring at him, and the clock ticking down, Stanislav Petrov went against protocol. He picked up the phone and told his superiors it was a false alarm. He had no proof, no guarantee. Just a feeling. And then, the longest wait of his life. Minutes passed. No missiles struck. Slowly, the tension in the room began to ease. The world outside continued, oblivious to how close it had just come to ending. Later analysis confirmed Petrov's suspicion. It was indeed a false alarm. The Oko satellites had mistaken sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds for the infrared signature of missile launches. Petrov had been right. But here's the cruel twist: he wasn't celebrated. Not at first. In the Soviet military, breaking protocol, even for the right reasons, was a serious offense. The incident was classified, buried deep in Cold War secrecy. Petrov was quietly reprimanded for not filling out his paperwork properly. He retired a few years later, living in relative obscurity in a small apartment. He didn't see himself as a hero. He told reporters later in life that he was just doing my job, that anyone in his place would have done the same. But experts disagree. They say most officers would have followed orders. And in this case, following orders could have triggered a nuclear exchange. Think about the weight of that. The launch of hundreds of missiles in both directions. The immediate destruction of major cities, New York, Washington, Moscow, Leningrad. Tens of millions dead in the first hour. Nuclear winter following within months, plunging the planet into famine and chaos. One man's decision in a dimly lit control room may have prevented all of it. The world only learned about Petrov's story after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the incident was declassified in the 1990s. By then, decades had passed. Petrov was invited to the United States, honored by the United Nations, and given peace awards around the globe. Documentaries called him the man who saved the world, and yet, he remained humble to the end. In interviews, he insisted he wasn't a savior, just a man who got lucky. But maybe luck is only part of it. Maybe it was the combination of training, logic, and human intuition that saved us. Petrov died in 2017, at age 77. His passing barely made the news, but the truth is, every person alive today owes a quiet debt to him. Without his decision on that September night, there's a good chance we wouldn't be here to tell the tale. So the next time you hear someone say one person can't change the world, remember Stanislav Petrov, the man who didn't push the button. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe to Lore of the Multiverse, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Petrov's seat that night? Until next time, keep your mind open and your curiosity sharp, because the next story could be the one that changes everything.